Okay, gang, this is MG Ham Sale, Carl, and I want to take a few minutes here in a video to clarify the alignment of the components of the sill structure. So in the inner sill plate, which runs vertically along the side of the frame of the car, you have a middle section which is lined up where the door opens. You have a front section which goes forward of the A-post where the hinges are for the door and up to the rear of the front wheel opening. And you have a similar piece in the rear that aligns with the rear section up to the rear opening. You can align these at the same height on the bottom. So you can just put a straight edge there. There's no problem with that. And you see on the left one I have 3 square holes for attaching the front fender, and on the right one there are 2 holes. Only one is visible, the other one's underneath this inner sill plate and has to be punched through. Okay, on top of this, so you weld those 3 together first, get them aligned, and because you can adjust the height of this, you want to be sure, and the first thing when you're doing the welding, that you get the left-right alignment perfect on these. And you can start with this hole, which gives you a pretty good starting place, then line up this piece so that this opening flange is pretty much in the door area, and then you line up this piece so that it matches up with the existing inner fender at the rear. Once you've got those together, you can put a couple of sheet metal screws, that's how I did it, in here to hold this piece to this. 2 more over here, then I took it off the car and I welded it. I took the screws out and I welded up the screw holes. Okay, so then the next step, and of course you recheck it each time before and after welding and make sure you've got it left, right, correct. Then for the vertical alignment, the tricky part is we're going to have to put this piece here called the inner sill on the inner sill plate. And it has to be welded in such a way that on the bottom we leave clearance for the fender holes, the fender screws at the left and right. And at the top, which is trickier, what will happen after this is assembled is that an additional piece called the rocker panel is welded in along this edge. So you can see here's the door opening, and the rocker panel goes between the A post, which would be over on this side, and the B post, or the rear post. And the rocker has an additional vertical flange that gets welded in here at the same height as this inner sill plate. So when we put the inner sill itself, we have to make sure that there's room enough for an additional flange to be welded in here. So it's kind of tricky to get that. Furthermore, this inner sill is going to have to be welded to flanges on the A post and B post in the door. And so that means that you also have to make sure that before you weld this here vertically, that this surface up here is going to hit the flanges on the car. And so let me show you that. So here we have the A post, and at the bottom of it you can see that there are flanges, and they're going to weld to the inner sill. But since we are going to weld this inner sill to the inner sill plate before we do all this, if we just weld this to that, then when we hit this, it'll constrain where our vertical inside the door is to the frame. So we got to get that one set first, and we can then move the height of this piece relative to the inner sill plate to get it up against the flanges. So that's how I'm doing it. And what I'm doing is over here on the frame, since I can't move the frame, I've got the frame up on jack stands and I've got it leveled as best I can. Then what's going to go in this area is a rubber buffer. It's about 1/4 inch thick that gets crushed a little. It ends up being just above this projection in the frame. And then the inner sill the sill ceiling plate goes in on the inside, on top of the rubber buffer. It goes from the rear where the battery box is, along the door opening, all the way up to the sill to body mount bracket. And it'll actually weld to that bracket. It's got a flange for it. So with that in place, I've got the height that I need to establish to match for the rest of the structure. So then I bring my inner sill, three-piece inner sill without the inner sill plate, without the inner sill connected to it, over to the car, and I line up the top flange of the inner sill plate to the top flange of the sill ceiling plate, and that gives me my vertical alignment, just like that. So those two are set at the same height. That gives me the height I'm aiming for, and I want to have my inner sill plate at that height. So I clamp it down, I tighten up this bolt over here, I put a few more clamps on it over to here and over to here, and I get that clamped down. Then the next thing is I bring over the, because the whole purpose of this exercise is to find out where to locate this inner sill relative to the inner sill plate. So then we bring the inner sill over, put it up against the flanges on the B post, up against the flanges on the A post. Right now I don't have any flanges because the B post is not assembled together. So with the B post there, once it's in place, then we'll have a flange to match to. In my case, I just clamp it to do the alignment. And then the inner sill will be at the right height. And then what you do is I put a couple of sheet metal screws through the inner sill's flange into the sill plate behind it. That gave me a rigid location of the inner sill relative to the inner sill plate, leaving enough room for the rocker panel to be welded in later. Take it off the car, weld the inner sill onto the inner sill plate, bring it back, assemble it again, get it all welded into the car, and then the next to the last thing will be putting in the sill ceiling plate, and then after that we'll weld in a rocker. The rocker, the inner sill, and the sill ceiling plate will all be clamped together and welded together. So it'll be three pieces here: the inner sill ceiling plate, the inner sill plate, and the rocker panel sitting up above the inner sill. Once it's all put together, you see the rocker, you don't see the rest of the structure.